I am Dr. Jahnavi, Faculty of Department of Political Science, Karnataka State Open University. I have more than 21 teaching experience. Today I am taking the hardcore paper, that is for Indian politics and political process, that is paper 3 for 100 marks. You know that 80 marks for theory and 20 marks for internal assessment. This core paper having 4 blocks. Each block consists of 4 units. In first unit, constitution making and salient features of Indian constitution. These are all the concepts come across. Let us begin the concept, that is making of Indian constitution. Before getting to the making of Indian constitution, we should start with introduction. So what do you mean constitution? Constitution having 3 main characteristic features. First one is constitution is the supreme law of the land. Second one is constitution is a framework for the government. Third one is constitution is legitimate way to grant and limit the powers of government officials. Constitution is supreme law of the land means in India, constitution is an ultimate. Every organ drawn the powers from the constitution itself. If you go to England, parliament is the supreme. What the parliament says, that is an ultimate in England. If you go to USA, judiciary is the supreme. What the judiciary says, that is final. But in India, every organ drawn the power from the constitution. Constitution is the supreme. Neither the court nor the parliament is the supreme. Constitution is the supreme. Second one is the constitution limits the power of government officials and as well as it gives the power to the officials. So on the one hand, giving up a power and unlimited power, it's not good. That's why constitution on the one hand it gives the power, on the other hand it imposes limitations on the government officials. Within the framework only they have to work. Constitution is the framework for the government. That means within the framework government has to work. Constitution is fundamental law in the administration of the country. So country administered only on the basis of constitution. It serves as a document that specifies the rules and regulations according to which only country must function. Constitution also serves as an instrument for safeguarding the fundamental liberties of the individuals. Because fundamental liberties are given by the constitution. Take for example, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. These are all some of the fundamental liberties are given by the constitution. That means constitution safeguards these fundamental liberties. And it is also serves as a safeguard against the tyranny of the rules. That means rules according to the law. There is no whims and fancies. Constitution sets out the rights of everyone which must be respected by the state. Therefore, it establishes the relationship between the government and the people. Constitution means it explains the structure of nation and as well as the organs of the state government. Every state has its own constitution. You can't imagine the state without constitution. That means a state without a constitution means that it may be a anarchy state. The most important purpose of a constitution, it draws the limit on the power of the government by outlining the framework within which only the government has to function. During the Crown rule in India, we should come across major landmark legislation. Most important legislations are Government of India Act 1858, Indian Council Act 1861, Indian Council Act 1892, Indian Council Act 1909, it is also known as Parliamentary Reforms, and Government of India Act 1919 and Government of India Act 1935 and finally Independence Act 1947. On November 26, 1949 we adopted our constitution. Then we having our own constitution. I want to give some review about Government of India Act 1858. This significant act was enacted in the wake of Sepoy revolt, and it is also known as the first war of independence. That means the war of independence started from here in reality. This act abolished the East India Company and transferred the government powers from East India Company to the British government. This was the statute Parliament has enacted to govern the India under the direct rule of British government. Hence, British Crown assumed the sovereignty over India in 1858. By this act, powers of the Crown were exercised by the Secretary of the State for India, assisted by Assistant Council of 15 members. The Secretary of the State, who is responsible to the British government, and he administered India through Governor General of India. The Governor General of India, assisted by the British Executive Council, found the necessity of seeking cooperation of the Indians in administration of their country. In pursuance of this, British Parliament enacted 3 acts. First one is Indian Council Act 1861, Indian Council Act 1892 and Indian Council Act 1909. This act was also known as Parliamentary Reforms. Previous acts and reforms did not meet the political aspirations of the Indians. Therefore, Parliamentary Reforms 1909 was introduced to increase the representation of Indians in the government of India. First time in 1906, the Indian National Congress was demanded for the representation of Indian in civil service and also for self-government. In addition to that, an elite group of Muslims demanded for separate electorate for the Muslims. As a result of this, in 1908, British Parliament appointed a Royal Commission to inquire into the relations between the Government of India and provinces and suggest the ways and means to simplify and improve them. In pursuance of the recommendations of the Commission, Indian Council Act 1909 was enacted, which is also known as Parliamentary Reforms. Parliamentary reforms did not introduce any significant change in the powers of the Council. They did not make any advance towards the establishment of representative government. In fact, the Secretary of the State frankly declared that he had absolutely no intention to introducing parliamentary form of government. The autocratic form of government that had been introduced after the revolt of 1857 remained unchanged even after parliamentary reforms. Therefore, Congress opposed this parliamentary reforms mainly because National Congress demanded for self-government and self-rule. But actually, through this enactment, Indians really, they were not given any role in the governmental affairs. Drastic changes made by this parliamentary reforms. However, some of the changes are made. It is nothing but a mere eye-washing. The Legislative Council at the center and provinces increased in size. The element of election was also first time introduced at the Legislative Council at the center, and as well as separate electorate for the Muslim was given. Lord Minto appointed Satyendra P. Sinha, the first Indian member of the Viceroy Executive Committee, and 2 Indians were nominated to the Council of the Secretary of State for Indian Affairs. For the first time, Indians were given the membership into the Imperial Legislative Council. Deliberative functions of the Legislative Council were also increased. by giving them the opportunity of influencing the policy by administration, except armed forces, foreign affairs and Indian state. The real purpose of the reforms of 1909 was to check the growth of unity among the Indians. All Muslims were grouped in a separate constituency from which Muslim alone could be elected. What we nowadays we call it reserved constituency, like that separate electorate was given to the Muslim. This was done in the name of protecting the Muslim minority. But in reality, this is a part of rule of administration, that is divided rule. They are dividing the Muslims and Hindus. Later, Simon Commission viewed separate election for the Muslim as a cordial problem and ground of controversy at every revision of the Indian electoral system. Next landmark legislation in constitution making is Indian Council Act 1919, or put it in another words, Government of India Act 1919. Actually, what happened? Indian National Congress became more active during the First World War and started its own campaign for self-government. In response to this, popular demand of the British government increased the association of Indians in every branch of administration and gradual development of self-governing institutions. For the first time, British government through this enactment introduced the responsible government in India. We should know the main features introduced by this enactment. First one is hierarchy in the provinces. That means system of hierarchy introduced in provincial government. That means division of executive branch into responsible sections. The first was composed of executive councillors. They are appointed by Crown. Second was composed of ministers who were chosen by the governor from the elected members of the provincial legislature. The provincial subject matter were divided into transfer subject and reserved subjects. We should know what are the reserved subjects. Reserved subjects like law and order. It includes justice, police, land revenue and irrigation. They were controlled by the British governor directly. The transferred subjects like local self-government, education, public health, public works and agriculture, and as well as forest and fisheries were given to the Indian ministers of the province. This system was ended with the introduction of provincial autonomy by the Government of India Act 1935. The next characteristic feature of 1999 enactment is relaxation of central control over the provinces. This relaxation of central control over the provinces not only in administrative but also in legislative and as well as financial matters. This revolution of power to the provinces should not be mistaken for a federal distribution of powers, but provinces got the power by way of delegation from the center. Third character feature is the Indian legislature was made more representative. That means it introduced for the first time the bicameralism and direct election in the country. Thus, Indian Legislative Council was replaced by bicameral legislature consisting of upper house or Council of State and lower house, or put it in another words, Legislative Assembly. Next landmark legislation is Government of India Act 1935. As a failure of Simon Commission, the Round Table Conference led to the enactment of Government of India Act 1935. Recommendations of the committee, that is Simon Commission, were incorporated with certain changes in the Government of India Act 1935. Let us discuss the main features of Government of India Act 1935. First one is federation and as well as provincial autonomy. This act abolished the diarchy in the provinces and introduced provincial autonomy in its place. This act divided the legislative power into the list, that is called union list, state list and concurrent list. Second characteristic feature of this enactment is the system of diarchy introduced at the center. Consequently, the federal subjects were divided into reserved subjects and transferred subjects. However, this provision of the Act did not came into operation. Provincial autonomy means distribution of legislative powers between the center and the provinces. It is a threefold division was made. There was a federal list over which federal legislature had exclusive power to make legislation. Then there was a provincial list upon which the provincial government has a exclusive power to make legislations. Third one is there is a concurrent list over which both federal and provincial legislatures had competencies to make legislations. So, last one is residuary powers. Residuary powers means subject matter which were not entered into any of the list or call it residuary subject matter with regard to which the central government has exclusive power to make a legislation. Those days we are not calling it as a central government, that is Viceroy, means Governor General was empowered to authorize the legislature for the provinces as well as the center. 1919 Government of India Act, there was separate electorate were given to only to the Muslims. But 1935 Government of India Act went another step further by providing separate representation not only for the Muslims but also for the Sikhs, Europeans, Indian Christians. This created a serious hurdles in building up the national unity. Finally, in constitution making, we got the Indian Independence Act 1947. Till 1947, the Government of India functioned under the provisions of the Government of India Act 1919 and Government of India Act 1935 relating to the Federation. Thus, the Executive Council means Executive Council was the Cabinet of the Government of British India headed by Viceroy, provided by the 1999 enactment, continued to advise the Governor General till we got independence. From 1947 Independence Act, it abolished the sovereignty of British government. It ended the British rule India and declared India as an independent and sovereign country. Following the end of British rule, British India was partitioned into India and Pakistan. Through this enactment, the Crown was no longer the source of authority. That means India became independent on August 15, 1947. In reality, though India remained a dominion till 1950, it was only on January 26, 1950 that the country was able to break free from the monarchy and transferred into a sovereign, democratic and republic country after its constitution came into effect. This 3 years of the dominion status, though, were crucial in the ultimate creation of a democratic republic. Thirdly, through this enactment, sovereignty of dominion legislature. The Indian Independence Act 1947 stated that constituent assemblies of both the dominions were to act as the central legislatures and would have full powers to make laws for the respective dominion. They would act as a sovereign bodies for the legislative purposes. After the constitution came into force, Indian Independence Act, Government of India Act 1919, 1935, all earlier enactments are become ceased to come to an end. However, we should know that what are the salient features of Indian Independence Act 1947. This enactment provided for 2 dominion states. We know that one is India, another one is Pakistan. The boundaries between the 2 dominion states were to be determined by a boundary commission which was headed by Sir Cyril Radcliffe. Pakistan is to comprise the West Punjab, East Bengal, territories of the Sindh, North-West Frontier provinces, Sylhet division of Assam, Bhagalpur, Khairpur, Balochistan and other 8 princely states of Balochistan. The authority of the British Crown over the princely states ceased and they were free to join either India or Pakistan or remain an independent. Both the dominion of India and Pakistan were to have Governor General to be appointed by the British King. The Act also provided for a common Governor General if both of them, that means India and Pakistan, agreed to have. So there is no question regarding that. They are that time they are wanted to become independent. That's why they have a separate Governor General. I hope you understood the concept and thank you, my dear students.